Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. We're back at Books at Lunchtime.
That we are. And we're delighted today to have somebody else to talk to. It's not that Tracy and I don't like talking to each other, but the conversation is always much better if we get someone else involved. So today we're saying hello to Cathy Rentzenbrink. Hello, Cathy.
Hello, it's extremely nice to be with you.
It's jolly nice for you to be with us. We're very, very happy about this. So Tracy ran into you at the BA conference a while back and recounted this to me in awe, because she just finished this little gem, which she then passed to me, which I've been enjoying. And I think she flagged you down rather, didn't she? I don't know if it was effusive in her praise. So that's how we grasped you. But what have you been doing, Cathy? What are you up to?
So I've had a really busy autumn, which started actually with chairing the Booksellers Association conference in September, and then I've been to lots of festivals. I've done creative writing teaching at Arvon in Lumbank and up in Cumbria, and I'm back home now for the foreseeable future, November, December, most of January and February, and it is really nice to be in one place and be reunited with my family and my bookshelves. I was really going to say bookshelves first then. No, say your family first. And carrying on with my new sort of attempt, hobby's the wrong word, I'm trying to swim in the sea all through the year, as in like carry on through the winter. So I was in the sea this Saturday and I'm going to try and do it all through the winter. So that's my...
Wow, that sounds invigorating.
I mean, it's very good for writing in that I think you can take lessons kind of about doing stuff that you might not necessarily want to do, because the funny thing about writing is obviously I really love it and make huge sacrifices for it, but I mean I never really feel like it. Never. People say, like, but you've written lots of books. I was like, I know, also I'm really not wanting to. So I never really feel like it, but it's a bit the same with swimming. I don't really ever feel like it, but then I do it and I feel great afterwards. So I'm kind of trying to build those sorts of mindset skills. So one of the things I say to myself is rather than something like, oh, this is cold, I say to myself, this is very refreshing. So we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that the more people I say it to, the more it will help me carry on
with it, because we're going to check in with you now. We're going to give you a call in the darkest months of weeks and days in January, and just check up that you are doing it.
So I want to talk about some books, Cathy, because I did find you because I had read Write It All Down while we were camping, and it was the first time I'd been away. I haven't brought my copy. It was my first time camping, and so I was just stuck in the fresh air. And sorry, I'm in the shop, and it was an absolute break, and it just seemed to really speak to me in a really powerful way. Well, because I'm a sucker for a writing book anyway. But your tone was just very honest about how it's not easy for anybody, but everybody has something that's worth telling. And we will talk about your more current book, because Write It All Down isn't available until January. But do you want to tell us about Write It All Down? Because I think there's some of that in this other book.
Yes, so it was really nice for me when you did flag me down at the BA conference, because I think you were the first person who'd read the book who I didn't already know. Do you know what I mean? Like the first person outside of my agent or my editor or my friend, like the first real person. And that's always a really exciting moment with a book. So yes, I mean, it kind of started out because when I wrote my first book, which was of course a great sort of labor of love, called The Last Act of Love, and it's about the death of my brother, and I was kind of like writing that and giving up on writing that for years and years and years. And then when I did finally do it, lots of amazing things happened to me that I didn't necessarily expect, which was partly that people responded. People wrote to me, talked to me, sent me messages about themselves, and I found that like a really great honor. And also I started teaching writing because people asked me to do workshops, and I realized how much I loved that, like to the point where I would say, like, if I was born to do anything, I don't think I really was necessarily born to write books, but I think I was definitely born to teach writing. And it kind of also, it takes the edge off my own sort of self-doubt and despair and the difficulty of writing when I can put that in the service of other people. And pretty much as soon as I started teaching, I mean, I could just massively took to it straight away. And pretty much as soon as I started doing it, people said to me, you should write all this stuff down. And then I was sort of like, oh, well, I've got other things to do, which I did. You know, I was stuck writing lots of other books. But eventually I managed to get unstuck with all of them. And then I used the writing book kind of as my carrot. So when I was stuck writing one of the other books, I'd think like, if I get this done, then I can do my writing book. So that was what it was. It was always it always existed for me kind of as a treat. And I do really like the fact that it exists, and I'm really looking forward to it being out in the world. Because I do genuinely think people should write, you know, I mean, if they want to, you know, I don't mean like writing is better than other things. I don't mean that if you really want to play football, I'm going to make you write a book instead. It's not that. It's that I do want to sort of empower people to think that they can do it, and that they could give it a go, and like, why not them? Why not, you know, why not do it?
And one of the things we talk to people about a lot in the bookshop is that everyone should write, because it is so powerful and you learn so much and you access things that you had no idea you were going to write about. But that doesn't mean that everyone should write to be published, because sometimes things are just really powerful for yourself. The process of doing it is healing, because actually the publication process is pretty brutal. And it can actually destroy the joy of having written in the first place. So I frequently tell people, especially those I feel like I can be really honest with, I say, your story is really special. Don't do this to yourself and your family. Write it, print half a dozen copies and keep it for yourselves. You don't want to put it through the persecution of people who want to make money off it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's a shame. People do tend to be very, like, our culture is very focused on the fact that because you can make money writing, that you should, because you can get published, or you could get published, that you should. So quite often when, like I was teaching a week recently, talking to this about the people there, and they were saying like, oh yeah, when I say I'm coming on a writing course, people say things like, oh, well, let me know when your bestseller is out, or let me know when I can buy it. And I think it's a great shame, because we wouldn't, you know, like if I went to do a watercolor course or playing the ukulele or embroidery or flower arranging, I wouldn't necessarily expect I should be able to make money from it by the next week, should I? So I definitely feel that the part of that for me is that that writing as a kind of a tool and a pleasure for the self is probably where it should start. And then publication is really, really complex. So again, it's not that it doesn't have great things about it, but it doesn't, for me, I think as well, it's very clear in my head that it almost doesn't matter what you want. The best way to start is to just not worry about the prospect ever of having to share it with people. And that's the best way to start, because then you've got that kind of privacy. It's really difficult quite often when people are stuck and can't get going or can't carry on. It's because they've got other people's voices in their head, and that's what's blocking them.
And there's a certain amount of terror involved. If you're doing it well, you're going to really be facing your fears, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's difficult to do. And I definitely think it's difficult to do anyway. And it's certainly difficult to do if you're then imagining everybody that you've ever known, like including all the people that don't like you reading it. That, you know, quite a lot of what I have to do to make work is this sort of mental gymnastics by, you know, most of the time writing a book, I just have to imagine that everyone else is dead, which feels a bit brutal, but it's the only way I get anywhere. What I do, you know, and I think I don't have to show anyone, like, ever. And I've done that with all my books. And of course, the first one I did write like that, but all the other books I've written, I have been under contract whilst writing them, you know, so they have already belonged to a publisher.
Wow.
But even with that, I've usually, and again, this took me a long time to twig with the second one, but from now on I just do it. So even whilst being under contract, I have this bargain with myself. I say to myself, you don't ever have to show anyone, you don't have to show this to anyone if you don't like it. You have to finish it. Like, you're not allowed to not do it, but you don't have to show anyone. If you don't want to, you don't have to show anyone. You can give the money back. So I never pay, you get a signature advance. I never spend it until I've delivered, because I always want to know that I could give it back if I can't write, you know, if I can't write the book, if I don't want to. And that's all kind of slightly happening in my own head. Like, again, part of me knows it is sort of my job and I really don't want to have to give that money back. But then for another part of me, it's really important that I can tell myself that I could if I didn't want to share it. It's all like little tricks, basically, to make myself do it. And it's all about jumping over the fear of what will people say and what will people think, and letting that, you don't want that muddying the waters, especially at the early stages, I think.
Yeah, I really picked that up. And it's about be honest, write your own book, admit the things that people don't want you to admit, and you know, deal with the fallout later if you decide to do something well with it. So there's the whole part about honesty and accessing those places, but then it goes into, okay, but if you want to do it really well, here are the tools of the trade. Here's how you improve on it. Other books you can read. I went on to read My Name Is Why after reading that, and gosh, talk about an expose. So yeah, face your fears and be willing to admit what people don't want you to admit. Now, you just said pretend that everyone else is dead, which is the opposite to the title of this book, isn't it?
It is. Yes. You can see, can't you, from that my mind runs on about this whole question of whether or not people are alive or whether or not people are dead, and like what the difference is and the extent to which it matters. Yeah.
So can you tell us about this book then, because this is available now, isn't it?
Yeah, so
now in Kett's books.
Yeah, my first novel, my fourth book, and my first novel, and I feel really proud of it because I have always wanted to write a novel. I think I wanted to write a novel since I knew what novels were, you know, which is when I was really little reading books. I think I don't remember the desire, like I don't remember the moment when I had the desire. So I think it happened before I always have memory. Like I don't remember learning to read either. So I think for as long as I've had conscious memory, I've loved books and I've wanted to write one. Yeah, so I always wanted to write a novel and then couldn't, and then had to, you know, write my first book as a memoir, which I think was the right thing to do now. But yes, I wanted to sort of explore some other things, and I really wanted to have a look at I was trying really hard to write a book in which no one died. I think that my thinking is very sort of death soaked, obviously because of what happened to my brother. Yeah, I was all the times I used to try to write novels when I was younger, before I'd written my memoir, like everybody was just dying all over the place, you know, horribly. And then I thought, like, this is great, I've got out of this, I can write a book in which nobody dies. And I did find that really difficult to do. So there's a little bit of you know, around the edges, but again, when I had the idea for that title, it's set on a street called Magnolia Road, and so for a long time the working title was Magnolia Road, and I knew it probably wouldn't be called that, but it was the working title. So when I told my editor, I said, I've got a new title for the novel, and I told her, Everyone Is Still Alive, and she said, yeah. She said, I like it. She said, it's quite reassuring, isn't it, for people who know that you have this penchant for killing everyone off. So yes, I think it's and it's you know, the little boy in it says to his mum, he has a nightmare and wakes up, and he's 5 and says to his mum, is everyone still alive? So that's kind of where it comes from in the text. It's something my parents and I say to each other quite a lot, and I one of the characters, Juliet, her mother says it. I've really lost the plot now on what I've actually put in the novel and what's just happened in the novel in my head. So definitely in the novel in my head, if you see what I mean, it's something Juliet's mother says to her, like whenever anything goes wrong, she'll say, oh, well, everyone is still alive. And my parents and I say that to each other a lot. Oh, well, we're all still alive. You know, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened, but we're all still alive. Because, you know, we have, you know, one of the things I think that an exposure to sort of extreme tragedy does give you, I mean, you have to work at it, but it also does give it to you, is like an ability to not care about the sorts of things that trip other people up. So I mean I am really like that. I don't sweat the small stuff, as they say. Like, I don't care about the sort of things that you know, a lot of people care about. Sometimes it's a bit disconcerting for people. I think sometimes my husband would like it if I cared about normal things a bit more, whereas I'm basically, as long as we're all still alive, I mean, I just don't care. I just can't get wound up about stuff.
One of our colleagues, if I go to one of our colleagues with something that is really upsetting me, she'll say, has anyone died? No. And she's, okay, well, sit down, it's fine then.
It is that, isn't it? But what I'm really interested in modern life is how anxiety inducing it is, and how increasingly difficult it is to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't matter, and that even things that don't matter do matter if you think they matter. So I wanted to kind of poke into all of that. And I think that, again, nowhere I feel is this more on show than like life with small children. So that's what I decided to use as my landscape for this novel. The sort of the fairly pointless, again, so much of it's so pointless, but it's like it does matter if you think it matters, or if someone thinks it matters. Again, all that stuff about, you know, all the endless things you're always having to dress your kids up for, like nativity plays and World Book Day and Easter hat parades and all that sort of thing, and whole class parties. It's like all that, and simultaneously thinking, well, surely this is nonsense, but it kind of isn't, because if everybody else is caring about it and then you choose not to care about it, you're kind of making a statement. And, you know, so all of that sort of stuff, I just wanted to have a good old dig around in all of that, but hopefully in a like, you know, not a preachy way.
No, and it is very much the landscape of the book, isn't it? There's a scene where one of the husbands is admitting that he's been saying someone else that he's having an affair, and one of the children tears up and has a very urgent interruption, like they've spilled their drink or something like that. and he said, you know, is this really adult life, that even the momentous moments in your marriage, splitting up, is still interrupted, and you could still only do it in 30-second adult increments? And that's true, that's how it is.
Yeah, it is how it is, isn't it? And there's sort of a beauty in that, I think, as well as a frustration. So I wanted to just have a look around at all of that, and yeah, and I'm pleased with it. I think, you know, it does feel, I just feel really happy that I've managed to write.
No, I'm really, I've not quite finished it. I'm really enjoying it. It is one of these books, a bit like Anne Tyler and Mary Lawson, where the lives keep going and you feel like quite not very much is happening, but actually quite a lot is happening in the individuals. I am really interested in the link between, or is there any connection between, you know, your write it all down is capture your life, see and find what their meaning is. And then this couple have moved into this road, Magnolia Road, and Liam, one of the husbands, is a writer, and he's writing down the lives of all of these people, and she's really worried that their lives should not be his next novel. So I'm just interested in how that unfolds.
So I think one of the things I'm really interested in is this thing of like what it means to be a writer, what the urge is to write about yourself and about other people, and then what some of the moral and ethical and creative constraints are about those. And I think having Liam in this book was another way for me to explore that. And I think that, I mean, certainly I do try to be a decent human being first, and I really don't, I can feel myself being a greedy writer sometimes, and I don't really like it. It's interesting because all that stuff said things like, you know, you've got to have a chip of ice at the heart and stuff. I mean, they're all it's all said by men, that kind of stuff. But I've always been, and I'm just always been quite interested in that, in all that stuff, the stuff that writers say about writing. You often kind of like using creatively justifying being a bit of a shit, you know, that kind of thing. But then parts of me sort of suspects that I would be a better writer if I could be a bit of a shit, or at least a little bit less of a, you know, people pleaser. But equally, I've worked out, kind of doesn't matter. Like it's almost like not up to me, I've realized, because I've got a really low threshold for being able to sleep at night. So I would just feel really queasy and sick if I did something that I perceived to be dishonorable. So therefore I'm sort of safe with it. But I thought it'd be interesting to have Liam with a slightly different value system. And the thing with Liam is he wrote his first book whilst he was working behind a bar, and he just started writing down what people said. So when they've moved into this new road, and his wife Juliet, she's, you know, she goes out to work, she earns all the money by now because he had quite a successful first book, but he's no longer getting any money from that, and he's stuck on the second book, keeps writing different things. She says to him, you've got to make friends with those mums at the school gates because we don't want Charlie missing out. And he just thinks, well, if I've got to be there with them, I might as well start writing them down. But of course, it doesn't go quite as he expects it to. And it was, again, it was, I wanted to think about parenthood, and I wanted to show the different perspectives on a situation. So one of the things I did have a lot of fun with was that thing of showing two halves, that, you know, this idea that there's lots of sides to a story. And that's something as well I was getting at in the novel, in hopefully with like quite a light touch, that there's loads of, and I'm flattered by the comparison to Anne Tyler, so thank you. But again, yeah, I wanted to write a novel kind of in which not much happens, as in it's not, the characters aren't just a vehicle for some kind of plot reveal. but where it is also sort of bursting with story. So this sense that you could almost at any point go off on any of these tangents and follow any of these people, and you'd learn interesting things. But that it does kind of like come together with this in this coherent way, so that it's a kind of a satisfying. I didn't want to write anything too kind of experimental or meta. I wanted it to be to function as a satisfying novel, but also slightly to have this built-in kind of critique or consideration of what a novel is and what it means to write a story and what you have to deliver in terms of a story to people. But whilst kind of almost like secretly not really delivering what a novel is supposed to deliver in the terms of, you know, setup and conflict and resolution, and
is that
build to this, and then we must see this happen. I was trying to give all that the slip.
so is that almost more like real life? Because real life is you get up every day, you do the washing, you how to avoid stepping on the Lego, you've got to go to work, all of that. And you're waiting for something to happen. So he's waiting for something to happen on the street, and something does happen, not what they're expecting. And that is kind of like real life. You're every day you're getting up, you're waiting for something to happen. So your characters aren't there to drive the plot, but the plot unfolds because of their just sort of waking up every day.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm interested in the texture of real life, which I was trying to capture the texture of real life in a particular time. So again, it's a really specific time frame. Not that I think you would know this reading the novel or need to know reading the novel, but I needed to know it. So it takes place in the summer of 2018 to the summer of 2019. And it was really important to me that it was sort of post-Brexit and Trump, but not 16 or 17, where these characters would still be talking about it all the time. They've reached that weary point of fatigue with global events, but it's pre-pandemic. And I do think I've captured something of that texture of the time, like through the children, through the behaviours, through what people are caring about. And of course, the great challenge of how to capture the the boringness and tedium of life with small children, which again is such a taboo thing to say, but I mean it is boring and tedious a lot of the time. But how to capture that, but without being boring, that was really hard. But again, hopefully I've managed to I had to cut a lot out, because again there was a lot more. My editor gently suggested we don't need quite so many whole class parties, because I'm just fascinated by them. I could endlessly write about, the horror of having to take 30 children to yet another sort of soft play environment, and precisely what happens, what so-and-so says, and who wets themselves in the ballpark, all that kind of thing. So I had to kind of I put lots of that in and then took some of it out. So I was definitely actually after the texture of real life. And again, I'm completely fascinated. It's really interesting because until you said, I hadn't quite thought about these two books, the writing book and the novel in relationship with each other, because of course the writing book's not out yet. But again, I think reading both books, you'd probably be able to see that I'm utterly fascinated with the difference between fiction and real life, because one of the things I write about a lot in the writing book is about even writing a memoir with the attempt to be truthful. There's a lot of ways in which aiming to put real life on the page that's not the best way to do it as a writer. It tends to trip you up and make it difficult. So like if I think I give an example, always been fascinated by this. So if in real life, say, I leave my house to go and catch a train to somewhere, and halfway down the hill, live on the top of the hill, halfway down the hill, I realize I've forgotten my keys. So in real life, if that happens, I just go home and I just get my keys and I just go back down the hill. And if I've missed the train, I'll get a later one. That's what happens in real life. Almost uniquely, almost all the time, that's what happens in real life. But if you've got that set up in a novel or even in a memoir, woman walking down the hill, going away for a while, forgets her keys. If she turns around and goes back to the house, she's about to discover something. There has to be a reason why that's happening. She's about to find out that, whatever it is, that the partner's doing something they shouldn't be doing, or that some action is going to be put in motion. So I'm just completely fascinated by that conjunction, that sort of compare and contrast on real life and fiction. And again, how you can write a novel where you do need to do that. You can't continually have people forgetting their keys and nothing happening.
See, that kind of thinking has done me a disservice. Fiction has completely set me up for disappointment, because I would forget my keys and go home and wait for something to happen. And I would just be getting my
Yeah.
keys.
I completely agree, and it in lots of ways ruins me. Like I absolutely can't go running in the dark because I'm convinced that the area is really safe and stuff. I just can't do it because I just know that in a novel, if a woman goes running in the dark, nothing good is coming from that, is it? So there's lots of times where I'm always trying to calm myself down and say to myself, this is all right, you're not in a novel. And my whole example about the keys comes from when that happens to me, which it does quite a lot because I'm quite careless and forgetful. Always that period walking back to the house, I'm like terrified, panicking, and nothing ever happens, nothing ever does go wrong. And that was what made me see that it's because of this thing of like, if I was in a novel, and I say it quite a lot to my friends. I'll say, like, if we were in a novel now, this would be about when the nice woman Helen, who runs the Arvon in Lumbank, she picked me up from the station. It was dark and we were driving, and again it's like these back roads, quite steep, and there was a light in the sky, and she looked up at it and she said, what is that? She said, it doesn't look like a normal plane. And I said, if we were in a novel now. So it's not just what would happen if you're in a novel, it's like, what sort of novel would you be in? Because I'm not usually in that sort of a novel where you could actually be spotting a UFO and it could be about to develop in that way, or I'm more usually in that kind of like, well, slightly boring domestic novel where, well, not boring, I'm usually in the sort of domestic novel where what's about to happen usually is that someone's about to die. Because again, that's my experience of real life, that it was trundling along extremely nicely and kindly, and then bam, no warning.
And I know your story because I've heard you speak a few times, but I'm not sure if Em does, and our viewers probably don't. So would you briefly like to talk about what happened, just because you've referred to it?
Yeah, so I had a sort of a broadly happy and interesting childhood. And then when I was 17, my brother Matty, who was 16, who I adored, he was knocked over by a car, and he needed emergency brain surgery, and he didn't die straight away, but nor did he ever regain consciousness. And then there was 8 years that elapsed between that night and the funeral. And yeah, I mean, just awful. And I'm still sometimes, and obviously I wrote my first book about it, The Last Act of Love, and as a result of that, have talked about it again and again and again, and I can now talk about it. But still, when I say it, I'm still like, a bit of me is still like staggered. A bit of me still can't quite believe it. It remains really, really present. I mean, not so much as it was like at one point. I mean, an awful lot of my life, I just kind of couldn't really get on with any semblance of real life because I felt really stuck in the road. I wasn't there when the accident happened, but the first man who stopped in a car phoned there was before mobile phones. He phoned an ambulance from the edge of the village, the call box at the edge of the village, and then he came to the pub where we lived and was kind of shouting in the car park, and I opened the window and went down and got in his car. And so I was with my brother in the road, kneeling next to him, waiting for the ambulance. And I've so often felt like I just spent all my life sort of still kneeling in the road, sort of stuck in that moment of kneeling in the road, which again, I think also I just sort of find really interesting, my life, other people's lives and fictional lives. Like where are these moments where we get stuck? What are these significant moments? What do they mean? And then how we can, one of the things I do really think writing can offer you is it offers you a different choice. It can offer you a different way to see things. I had this really nice therapist once who said to me, he said, we can't change the event, but we can change your relationship with the event. And that's what I've got much better at. Like, I'll never not be sad, and I'll never not be to a certain extent bowled over by what happened to my brother, but I have changed my relationship with the event, and I'm able to see it more now as experience. I've been thinking a lot about innocence and experience recently, and that idea that that's really what life is, isn't it? Again, if you're lucky enough to be born into like a sort of a decent environment with parents who love you and are trying to do their best for you, then you sort of start off innocent, and then you accumulate all these experience in different and sometimes more brutal ways than others. And that's how I think about life at the moment, but also that it's a better way to think about it, rather than kind of like tumbling into almost this sort of consumerist trap that, you know, why has this bad thing happened to me? I've bought all the right, you know, like back to the novel and the small children, like I've bought all the right stuff from Mothercare, or probably the more upmarket shop that the characters would choose. Like, so why therefore is life not going the way I wanted it to? Whereas I think if you think of life as a mechanism for accumulating experience, then that can kind of take the edge off it when it's really hard. A few times in the pandemic where, I mean, like everyone, I don't know anybody that wasn't dealing with like really big stuff in the pandemic. So often like the collateral damage. So, you know, parents who couldn't be visited, and, you know, anxious children, that sort of thing. But when I had my big stuff in the pandemic, at night I would lie in bed and I would think, well, I learned a lot about being a human being today. And just being able to see it like that, rather than like, oh, what did I do to deserve that? Rather being able to just sort of just slightly shift it, just made me a bit more able to kind of like carry on getting out of bed, so I could sort of do my duty and do what I had to do. So that's what I sort of think about all that at the moment. So yeah, I keep trying, keeping learning, and again, life as a learning experience, not as a shop or a spa.
I think it's also the other way around, isn't it, Cathy? I mean, you're talking about, and you, Tracy, as well, talking about, you know, you go home and you're expecting something to happen because, you know, it's what we've learned. But I think life is the other way around, that you don't expect it to happen because none of this stuff's ever happened. So I think if something then does happen that sets you off kilter, it's almost as if, you know, your experiences don't hold true at all because it was the wrong kind of disruption. Like, you know, you're waiting for, you know, there to be someone burgling the house or catching someone cheating on someone or something like that. But in reality, I think that, you know, the trains come and they knock you over from a different direction. And I think that's what's really interesting listening to you speaking, is about you prepare yourselves for these fictionalized realities and these fictionalized occurrences, and invariably if we do suffer some sort of downfall or odd event, it's not usually what we expect at all. It usually comes from somewhere completely different. So you're right, from a writing point of view, from a life point of view, I feel sometimes that's the benefit of reading, is it sort of helps you deal with these abnormal unexpected consequences of things. It's really interesting to hear you describe it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then I think there's this whole thing about where real life is, and I often think, I was thinking about this the other day. So I try to do this sort of daily writing practice, and I have been for years, on and off, again, as I say in Write It All Down. And one of the ways in which I start off is to just write a couple of sentences about daily life, where I am, what I'm doing. And the more time goes on, when I look back at it, I realize that what I'm interested in isn't what I thought I was writing about, but I'm interested in the daily life bits. Because now I'm reading about, you know, now, because my son's 12 now, but when I'm reading about stuff I wrote when he was 4, I want more of that, you know. I just want to, I want more of the daily life. And then you think like, gosh, yeah, I thought life was in the big, it's tempting to think life is in the big actions, whereas actually life is between the cracks, isn't it? And life is happening. And again, I think I was trying to get that in my novel, and I think I've kind of done it, you know, that actually life happens sort of sitting on the kitchen floor watching the washing machine go round. And that's really where life is. You think it's all in the, you know, how good is Christmas, or am I going to be promoted, or shall we move here, or, you know, what am I doing with my career? Whereas actually often it happens in the small moments between things. And that if you kind of I guess it's being almost like aware of the joy of that, like the joy of small things. And that's what, again, that's sort of personally where I feel at the moment, very much kind of, because we had a bit of health stuff in my family, which fingers crossed at the moment seems to be better than it was. So just the joy we're taking in just kind of like hanging out, you know, do you want to chop these carrots for lunch, or shall I chop these carrots for lunch? I mean, it's sort of amazing, and full of sort of humor and pleasure. And it's that how you, and I've always been obsessed with this, you see, this is probably in all my books, it's how you live with the knowledge that, you know, once the guillotine has come down once, you know, once you've had a big horrible thing happen from nowhere, how do you live with the knowledge that that might happen again? But at the moment, I very much am on the just like enjoying every moment for the possibility it holds, and just trying to be present with it. And again, not get lost in all those worries and concerns of what will happen about that, and what will happen about this, and will people like my books, and will, you know, all that sort of stuff, which does sound very silly and petty saying it now, but of course it you know, work dominates us, doesn't it, in the modern world as well. So yeah, so right at this moment I do feel I'm just about managing to live with 2 feet in my own life and enjoy it.
So if you were let's segue into our next question, Cathy. If you were wanting to live with 1 foot in another life, in another book, what are you reading?
Oh, I tell you what has blown me away. I read it last Christmas, and I read it again because I went to Arvon Lumbank in Yorkshire, which was owned by Ted Hughes, and so it made me want to reread this book again. So I'll take it off my shelf here, which is Red Comet. So it's about Sylvia Plath, and it's just so both sort of scholarly and extremely readable. And again, of course, being interested in writers as I am, I just kind of can't. I think I could just keep reading it again and again and again. Partly because I'm a bit menopausal, so my memory's gone really peculiar. So I just don't really remember anything. And that is not, it's not good, that, in loads and loads and loads of ways. But the only way in which it's good is I keep thinking like, oh, all the books I really love. And I do sometimes think like, oh, I've read that book so many times, it's a shame I remember it so well. I do think now like, oh, I could read Pride and Prejudice again because I don't remember it as well as I used to, despite having read it gazillions of times. So yeah, so I'd really recommend that. And you know, I mean, it's really fat, but it's just so well done, and it's kind of clear-sighted, and it's very interesting about, you know, the times as well. So it sort of hyper focuses in on Plath and the poetry, but it's also just very interesting in her milieu, like the way she was and what the world was saying then to women and to artists. So yeah, I absolutely love that. And can I do another one?
Please do.
And Empireland by Sathnam Sanghera, which I also really loved, and kind of didn't necessarily, I mean, I kind of sort of thought, wasn't necessarily expecting to sort of hugely enjoy it. It was more of a like, you know, of course I should engage with books about imperialism and the legacy of it, but actually, again, such is the sort of the style of the writing that it was very enjoyable as well as illuminating. He talks about empire and imperialism as a toxic cocktail of nostalgia and amnesia, which I thought was very interesting.
That's been popular here.
Yeah, and I really like to learn as I read, but again, I don't. I really like books where you kind of, where you feel the presence, with both books actually, different as they are, they've got a lot of knowledge and opinion to offer, but equally there's a sort of I don't know, maybe a modesty on the part of the author. You don't feel they're trying to kind of hit you over the head with what they think. They offer it in the service of you, the reader, and I think that's probably my favorite nonfiction does that. So yeah, I think about that sometimes when I'm teaching. It's such a long, you know, the best way to do it at the beginning is to not worry about having a reader. But I do think if you are going to think of a reader, you want to think of a kind of an intelligent, receptive reader. And if you write to that person, then the book will have the right tone. A lot of nonfiction I'm reading at the moment, I think it's a bit defensive. I think you can tell that the author has written it being scared that someone's going to shout at them on Twitter. And I'm not sure that's the right way to create something, because you have to keep some of the, you know, you have to again, work out how to sort of give the fear the slip. And something of that, I think, you need a bit of kindness, I think, possibly in all writing. As I'm saying that, I'm wondering if that's true, because a lot of the novels I like are probably quite cruel. But there's something about the milk of human kindness, I think, and it being quite an important quality in some types of books. So yes, so I'd highly recommend those two. And can I do a novel?
Please do.
Here we
I've
go.
been looking at that on your shelf.
It's lovely, isn't it? And look, this is what I do when I'm completely obsessed with something. I've got 3 different versions of the same book. I can't bring myself to give any of them away. I'll show you this one. Just whacked my computer. So this is Ruth Ozeki, who I completely adore, and this is called The Book of Form and Emptiness. When I read Ruth Ozeki, I have this feeling that I might be either going completely mad or becoming incredibly wise. And I did interview her recently, and I told her that, and she said, maybe you're doing both, which felt very cool. And it's the book is a character. The book is a character in this. Books are characters, and there's lots of. So again, I would say if you, dear reader, dear listener, if you've liked this conversation, if you've enjoyed anything about the way I think about life and books and the connection between them, I think I could just sort of almost like 100% guarantee that you'd probably enjoy this book. There was definitely a feeling when I read it that I felt, do you get this? I felt it had kind of been written for me. That it wasn't just a kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to quite enjoy this book, but that it had been specifically almost like made like for me, that it's my book. And I do feel that sometimes with books. And it's about a boy, he's 13, he's called Benny O, and his father dies. And he starts to hear the things in the house. He starts to hear voices from them. And then there's a library. There's a writer lady. Actually, he doesn't call her the writer lady. I think he calls her the typing lady. And you get the feeling that that's Ozeki herself in the library typing and watching what's going on. And yeah, it's just beautiful. It looks big, but I actually found it a very fast reading experience. And it's got lots of interesting, there's loads of interesting stuff. Lots of my favorite things: grief, mothers and sons, crows, kintsugi.
That's quite a list there, Cathy. But
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, like how it's a bit like I'd put my list of things I would like to read about. It's a bit like I'd put it in the magical cement mixer of life, and then this book popped out.
Isn't that what a library is, though? I think that's, you sort of put your things you want in, and the book pops out just for you, doesn't it? Oh.
It does. I tell you another thing I really love is I really love that Discovery of Witches trilogy by Deborah Harkness. And again, in some ways, it's not necessarily, I mean, I'm not sort of massively into anything that's kind of fantasy. It's witches and vampires. And the first one is called The Discovery of Witches. But I've often thought, like, why do I like those books so much? Because I mean, I do. I really, 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 really love them. Again, to the point of obsession. And it's partly because the witch in it, Diana, is she's a historian. She's a historian. She studies the history of alchemy. And it all starts because she goes to the library and calls up a manuscript she needs to examine for her studies. And then the library delivers it, but it turns out she's magically summoned it. Only she can get it. And then after that, it delivers back. It goes back into the library stacks, and no one else can get their hands on it. So it's all about this manuscript and these missing pages and what it means. And so again, it's exactly that thing of the idea that you could go. Imagine if you could go to a library and just say, "I've come for my book. Could you give me my book, or could you give me one of my books?" Because that, I think, and there's a bit about this in the Ozeki, I think, but I've always thought that there's something that goes on for me, probably the most magical thing or the most interesting thing about books is that there is a relationship that happens in the space between the words, because certainly for me, I am waiting for a reader to arrive to my books. And I'm not sure I even realized that initially when I started writing. It's something that grows upon me. But like, I now feel that my books are, they exist as a sort of a balloon, but it hasn't got air in it yet. So I've made a sort of a flat balloon, and then I'm waiting for a reader to come along and blow into it. But then they will kind of slightly almost, they'll then have, so it has a bit of a structure, but they will then decide almost like what shape they make from it and how much air they want to put into it, and whether or not they, I don't know, want to write something on it with a marker or let it go or use it for, do you see what I mean? So for me, it's intensely collaborative like that. And of course, I mean, it isn't for all writers, but definitely for me, the reader is the reader. So again, although I, you know, for most of the writing process have to imagine that everybody is dead, then also simultaneously at the same time, somehow the reader, the eventual reader, is kind of incredibly important. And I think the more I tumble to that in my own writing, the more it sort of becomes true. So with my book, Dear Reader, which is about the comfort and joy of books, when I get messages often from people who've read that, they say things like, I feel like you're my friend. I want you to be my friend. And I'm always like, yeah, but I'll be your friend.
That's how I felt. That's why I came and found you. There's
Yeah,
my
well, I mean, I
friend.
love that. I do really, I really adore that. I think it's like the most sort of delicious and wondrous thing, really. I'm always slightly worried it might disappoint, because of course you write books on a, well, I don't necessarily write books on a good day, but I edit them on a good day. So sometimes I'm a bit worried if I'm a bit tired or a bit miserable or a bit whatever, then it's almost like people are catching the bit of me that I did write in the book, but then I edited it out because it sounded a bit grumpy.
Well, what a treat to have to be able to talk to you about a wide sort of, you know, the fiction and the non-fiction worlds, Cathy. Thank you for joining us this lunchtime. I think you've given everybody a whole lot to think about as we proceed through the day.
Well, it's been a massive treat for me, and thank you, both of you, and thank you, Rachel, for saying that thing about, well, just noticing the sort of the thematic differences between Write It All Down and Everyone Is Still Alive, because I kind of slightly hadn't myself. And it's been very interesting for me. And that, again, that's one of the amazing things about having readers, because I didn't know this writing my first book because it hadn't yet happened. But it's not only that I like having readers, it's I like what people say about the work then makes me see new elements that I hadn't necessarily thought of before myself. And of course, that's very enriching. So
they've brought me joy. So I can't wait to see what you do next.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm going to find out what happens after page 200 now. And right. Okay. Thank you again for joining us. It's been really nice to see you, and we'll look forward to seeing you one way or another again soon sometime.
Massive pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Sorry.